Fantastic.
Well,
Enjoy
here
that.
we go. Now we have Natalie E West. Yeah, do you want to just introduce yourself to the viewers, to say what you do and why you're carnivore, I suppose?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So I've been a psychotherapist now for over 17 years, but I also use nutrition, obviously, as a foundation of that, teaching root cause, teaching people how their minds work, and also how their gut works with their mind, really important. So that's where I've been for the last 17 years. And I have now been carnivore for over 4 years. And everyone's gone. Not sure what's happened then, but I'll just keep talking. So been in this space really teaching people how their minds work and how important it is with what we fuel ourselves with through our gut-brain axis, and also to what we see, hear, and also absorb through our life. So yeah, hopefully you caught all that. You guys just disappeared on me.
Well, I was expanding your picture so people could see you a bit clearer. So we've had a submitted question, which is, what's the most common problem that people encounter with this way of eating? So in your field, what comes up the most?
So from my perspective, there's a couple of pathways that I help people understand. A lot of the time when we're conditioned with the diet mentality, a lot of the clickbait, and I will call it clickbait because carnivore trends have also started to kind of seep in, which also doesn't really help people who are programmed from jumping from one diet to another. So it's really about teaching people their diet mentality, where they learnt that, how they learnt, how to use food and why we use food, and also to value systems and self-image is within that space, and helping people understand why they're actually eating, why they've been eating the way they've been eating, but also how carnivore actually, it's a mental and metabolic health protocol. So, we've really got to understand the value structure of that and not jump on the bandwagons.
Yeah, I mean, Richard was quite revealing earlier on when he was saying that, because Richard has lost a lot of weight, and if you don't mind me repeating this, Richard, you were saying that you were making yourself sick, because you didn't want to gain any more weight. So is that the sort of thing that you encounter still, that people are just bulimic and anorexic, and is that a big thing that's still happening for you?
Yeah, look, so a lot of the time, I see a lot of disordered eating, really unhealthy patterns. I also come from a background of the bodybuilding industry, so I know my own disordered eating pattern with weighing things for many years, which doesn't really help our mindset in any way, shape, or form. I think the biggest thing is really getting people to understand their unconscious self-image, what's driving that behavior. So when we're looking at fear of food or fear of putting on weight or losing weight, it really comes back to, again, how we've been programmed externally through validation and acceptance. So even if we understand, one little word that how our mind works is, for example, when you use physical health, for example, versus metabolic health, physical health, your mind's going to automatically go external, and it's going to be about perceptions of external inward, of how we look and how we perceive ourselves and our value. If you use metabolic health, your mind mostly doesn't really know where to go with that, but it's more of an internal structure than an external structure. So it really is teaching people the value structures of why they have, again, been conditioned and programmed to use food with calories, dieting, all of that. Does that make sense, guys?
It does. Richard, have you got a question?
No, I'm just happy to take this in at the moment, to be honest. Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, it's something we keep coming back to, isn't it, in regards to how food addiction affects the way that we think about food, isn't it? How the dopamine, we're hardwired to chase dopamine hits, and when we are consuming foods that negate in the body's ability to process specific neurotransmitters within the brain, we instantly chase dopamine through foods that maybe we shouldn't be consuming. And that leads to this downward spiral where of food addiction, a spiral that we can't break. And that's exactly what it is, isn't it? It's a case of food addiction, which isn't a recognized addiction in the UK or the US. I don't know if that's the case in Australia there with you. But food addiction is a real thing. And how the food that we consume sometimes when we are being healthy. So I'm from a bodybuilding background as well. I used to be clinically obese and type 2 diabetic, suffered with chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, arthritic pains, suffered with these daily debilitating migraines that would make me blind. I lost the weight through keto, gravitated into carnivore, became a men's physique bodybuilder, British champion and European champion. So I can, I can sympathize with the effects of, as you were saying, in regards to bodybuilding and competing in that sort of environment and food addiction. But in the bodybuilding sort of scene, we consume foods typically that we deem to be healthy, but some of these foods negate the body's ability to absorb other nutrients. In particular, things like lectins and phytic acid, which are blocking the absorption of zinc, iron, and magnesium, and the body's ability to process these catecholaminergic neurotransmitters within the brain, which leads and further fuels this search and chase for dopamine, which leads to further food addiction. So even when we believe that we are consuming food, because we know that junk food isn't good for us, but we all, believe, or used to believe, isn't it, that a bowl of cereal or muesli is good for us, and we believe that certain plants are good for us, but these can block the absorption of these neurotransmitter signals within the brain, further fueling this food addiction. So it was a massive cycle, a struggle that I had to break, and becoming ketogenic and eventually carnivore managed to break that cycle for me. And now I'm still addicted to food. I love my food, but I'm not addicted to chasing those dopamine hits in regards to those sweet foods. I love eating steak, eggs, and fatty cuts of meat. So yeah, that's my 2 penneth.
I absolutely love everything you just said. And one of the biggest things is, when we talk about food addiction, I always call it a energy misfiring. So, we have using foods that aren't creating the right energy within our bodies. And also too, if we even go back to, between the age of 0 to 7, and when we actually using our taste buds and our senses and what we're actually programmed with our authoritarian figures with food, it really all starts there. And that's that dopamine center that really starts getting fired quite early, because we also have that taste bud connection immediately, right? So, but also to our minds and our bodies remember the memory of that. So, every single thing that we do, unless we're really conscious in understanding the metabolic pathways, both what I call physiological, psychological, and biological. So there's all different levels there when we talk about addiction. But again, not a fan of balance, not a fan of, moderation. It just doesn't work. It's a big bunch of BS. What you have to do is understand your fueling, driving pathways of why you're doing what you're doing. And also too, totally understand Richard being in the bodybuilding world, it is a very superficial driven kind of person operates, and using foods, high carbs. I got myself into trouble, for many years doing that. But addiction, a lot of the time, what people eat is gateway drugs to leading to very, very slippery paths that really are difficult to get back in track of. But also, too, one of the biggest things is, when you want to change the way you eat for both mental and metabolic protocol, and that's always why whenever I work with anyone, food is for your thriving. It's not just, but if you have an issue with having one bit of sugar, it's like you can't just have one little bit for your mental health. But again, we've got to go internal around that and value. Sorry, it's still a bit choppy. Hope I kind of answered some of that question.
Yeah, I was just saying, it was a little bit choppy there, wasn't it? But I think we picked up the gist of it there. Anything to add to that, Steve?
I was thinking that in the bodybuilding realm, when people are eating, they tend to have good nutrition, because otherwise you couldn't grow muscles without, adequate protein. But what about poor nutrition, where people are not getting protein, not getting fats? What's the power of that? Having a bad nutritional lifestyle, how does that affect the mind and the body, especially in relation to self-image?
So again, we've got to come back to what constructs we've learnt. So again, we've demonized meat, we've demonized saturated fat to be bad for us. Kind of cult thing when you're with people that kind of say, if you're going to eat a steak and have butter on it, you're going to die of a heart attack. You've really got to go through a lot of those things as well, around being, I guess, challenged or questioned as to why you want to actually use protein and fat as your main source. And I'm sure many people have spoken about it over the last 24 hours with you guys, but the brain loves ketones. It's not glucose is not really its preferred fuel. So whenever I'm looking at it from a mental and metabolic health, protein and fat is one of the most highest solutions that I see in people's mindset that changes, but also to their energy, the way that they see themselves, the way that they think, the way that they feel. And again, with the bodybuilding industry, it's very carb driven. But again, we've got to look at individual and why they're doing what they're doing. But in the space that I work in, it's fat and protein is the key, which is really birthright status, right? That's where we come from, and then we just feed ourselves as kids with lots and lots of rubbish that we get taught to feed ourselves with, or our parents do. Did that answer your question, Steve?
Yeah. For me, it's a bit difficult because it is chopping in and out, so we're missing some sort of key words all there. But I'm guessing that that you look for people who are not empowered, who feel that they can't control their life. So what do you do to turn that around so they actually feel like they've got some power over their own image and their own mind and body?
So I go through a few protocols with them. Firstly, it's just about me listening to, their thought patterns, their narrative patterns, where their mind travels to whenever they're talking about food or whatever diet they've been on for the last 20 plus years. So when I'm talking to someone, I get to understand what's conscious and unconscious behavior patterns. And, just by looking at someone, I can tell whether it's a conscious reaction or an unconscious one. So it's really just allowing people to understand what they're doing unconsciously first, but then also to allow them to be in a state of consciousness to start changing those narratives and patterns, but also to the value structure of most people are always anchored outside of ourselves. So, we have been taught to value food, which is an anchor, whether it's alcohol, food, drugs, or whatever it is. They're all emotional anchors outside of ourselves, which drive our behavior. So really it's about me teaching people where their anchors are and what their emotional content and attachments are versus connections. So it really is just a kind of, a one-on-one conversation to understand where they've been and to get them into a full state of consciousness so they can start changing their patterns. And I also give people tools and strategies how to do that every day. But the other thing is when we're combining nutrition and understanding, the carnivore protocol, one of the biggest things is we do that alongside gently. So we can't go into full unfamiliarity straight away. We have to do it gently, because the thing is your mind loves familiarity, whether or not it's good for you or not. Did you catch all that?
I missed the very end. You started to talk about the brain likes familiarity, and then it cut out.
So we're conditioned to be in a familiar space, whether or not it serves us or not. So, for example, what I mean by that, over and over again, you're building a pathway of familiarity. So the brain and the mind then goes, well, this is what we do. This is how we travel every day. This is how we think. This is how we feel. But what we actually have to do is, the more that you do that, behaviors, thoughts, feelings, reactions that then create the same outcome. If you want a different outcome, different things, different thoughts, feelings, reactions, narratives, but you can't do that without understanding how conscious you are. It's about thought, feeling, reaction, creating
Natalie, do you think it's worth you sort of logging off and logging back in just to see if we can get a better connection?
Is that any better? Let's have a...
Yeah, I can hear you better now. It is actually.
Okay.
That's
I
good.
don't know why it was doing that, but yeah, welcome. I'm back.
Yeah, it was very choppy and difficult. Yeah. So actually, Richard, what was you saying about being in a box and not
no, it's
feeling
doing it
worthy?
again.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, we were just having a conversation, Natalie, while you were off about the bodybuilding community. It's seen as being quite superficial, and people who compete love themselves. And in fact, I found it to be quite the opposite. Myself included, I never felt worthy of the company of others. My life for a long time was spent living in boxes. I would leave my box, my house, I would jump into my metal box. I would drive to a big box in which I would walk into that building and walk into my office, which was a small box inside the bigger box. So my life was spent living in boxes. Anxiety and depression was so bad that I quite often couldn't leave my house if there was anyone walking in the street. Neighbours would quite often think that I was rude, but it's quite often that I didn't feel worthy of the company of others. And for me, it was almost a case of trying to make myself feel better. If I could become bigger and better on stage, if I could go back and increase a placing or win a competition, that in some strange way it would give me some self-gratification and make me feel better, when in reality what I was doing is putting myself on stage for people to critique me, because people are not looking at you thinking, that person looks incredible when you're on stage. You were there to be compared against, your competitors. So you were being critiqued, which is probably the worst position that you could put somebody in who suffers with severe anxiety and depression. But this is what the lifestyle has done to me. So changing the foods that I consumed changed the way that my body produced those neurotransmitter signals within the brain, and allowed me to feel at least a little bit more confident in order for me to set foot on stage. So the food that I consumed quite literally, rewired my brain, if you like, in that respect, because I would have never have set foot on stage prior to that. But even until my last year of competing last year, where I was fortunate to win the European Championship, I was still in search of that gratification from others, if you like. You want someone to tell you that you've done well, because I think you feel that you're lacking something inside. So I genuinely believe that most people who compete professionally within that sport are not as confident as you would be led to believe by the persona that they pursue on stage. It's almost a case of playing a role. It's playing a part in a film or a movie. When you're on stage doing your routine, you are an actor playing a role, and this is what allows you to do it. You're in your costume, you're in your clothing, you're not yourself per se. But that's certainly the case for me. I didn't feel confident on stage. I didn't do it because I wanted everybody to look at me. I did it because I guess I wanted to feel better about myself, in a weird, twisted way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Richard. What you're saying there is exactly, what I learned about myself. And I didn't really realize, because I wasn't a therapist at the time that I actually competed. And when I actually understood why I was doing it, it was because of a negative self-image, through, getting your body into a state of a perceived perception of what might be, validated, or, however, having the best body didn't equate to have did the opposite, because really, it is about understanding that worthiness doesn't come from those external validations. It comes from within yourself. And totally understand. And I've worked with quite a few that have very, very negative self-images, but being on stage and getting a trophy and winning as many as you can, unless you work on that unconscious state and why, it will never change, and it will lead to a very, very slippery slope of disordered eating and behaviors. Again, I think, it's great knowledge to understand why we do these things, but would have high, mental health and things like that, and they don't. And it wasn't until, mostly people go either keto or carnivore when they realize the power of food for mental health. what that really means. So yeah, I totally agree. It's interesting concept when you're on stage, and I was also a judge for nearly 5 years, so I kind of went on to as well to judge people and critique people, which again, was a whole new world on that side of the desk.
Yeah. Anything you want to add to that, Steve? I mean, just to come back to what you said, it was indeed, I made a note that it was a pursuit of validation. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Do I still feel that way? I think we all do to a degree. But certainly, since I've been heavy or deep carnivore, a lot of these, I certainly wouldn't be speaking to you to find people today if I was suffering with this severe condition. I do public speaking events in front of thousands of people. So a lot of this must have been combated through the diet and lifestyle that I've adopted for certain, but I think it's probably always there, and I think it's maybe something that's in everybody to a degree. But I can only attribute my improvement to this to do with diet. I mean, I've retired from bodybuilding. I'm half the size that I was last year, and yeah, I don't like it. I don't like being smaller. But my goals have changed. I've come away from bodybuilding to compete in cycling and running. And in order to do that, being big is absolutely counterintuitive. Having wings on my back act as a sail on the bike and slow me down. So it's absolutely counterintuitive, isn't it? But yeah, I do miss the size and the mass. It did make me feel confident walking down the street in a tight t-shirt, biceps and chest bulging and people paying attention and looking did make me feel better. I don't get that now. But again, I don't feel that I'm looking for that validation so much either. I think that I get this validation maybe from other sources now in regards to what I do on a daily basis in helping other people reverse severe illnesses and diseases. But it's a minefield, and it's certainly an interesting topic for me.
Bodybuilding aside, even just clients who have had, problems with alcohol and, I'd call it probably disordered eating and drinking behaviors. But, the minute that they start carnivore, within a cup inch, and that is really the power of feeding and fueling yourself the correct nutrition, which is, species appropriate way of eating. And again, it's also something that I hear quite often is when people go down this, protocol, their reason for validation starts to go more internal about self-acceptance and validating yourself and what you're doing for you, not so much everyone outside of yourself, which again is really powerful because I, totally agree, Richard, with what you were saying. I love, being able to be in front of people and help people, but, seeing them validate themselves and using food primarily to do that is really life-changing. And you know what I always say to people, understand where the validation is coming from, because a lot of the time it's just emotional voids that we have within ourselves that we're trying to fix and fill with someone else or something. But once you get those emotional voids understood, and I would possibly say, if I was going to put a percentage on it, the power of eating, species appropriate carnivore way, it's probably, I would say, over 80%. You get that right. And then, then we just do tweaks and things like that around the mind and mindset and, self-image and value structures. Because remember, eating is also a form of a value. It's a self-respect. So a lot of the time we don't equate those two things to respect, and it is.
Yeah. Anything? Do you want to jump in with that, Stephen? Enjoying your rest. I think Stephen's been standing for the better part of 22 hours or so. Yeah, we had that. Yeah, we did. Yeah, I was just making a quick comment there with Stephen that he's been so we've been on this now for how many hours, Steve?
22 hours.
20. So for the majority of that time, Stephen has been standing. So I've been sitting.
Wow, you guys are amazing.
So he's just been earning his well-earned seated rest, I think, Steve, isn't it? and I've just pulled you back up.
Well, yeah, I'm standing here barefoot, and it's it's actually just my feet hurt from standing all day, 22 hours, 22 and a half hours. Anyway, I think we might have to curtail this. No, I think the internet is just too choppy, really, and I'm impressed that people are still viewing because it's just too disjointed, I think. So we'll have to thank you for turning up, Natalie, I think.
Maybe we can pick it up another time.
Yes. Yeah, I'd like to do this with the three of us. So just make sure we can get a good internet connection, I think.
Yeah, that'd
Yeah,
be great. Yeah, absolutely.